Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Batman Hush. Now, Hush is a comic book story arc written by Jeph Loeb and illustrated by Jim Lee, and published between the years 2002 and 2003. Now, Jeph Loeb also wrote the Batman graphic novel The Long Halloween, and its sequel, Dark Victory. Now, Hush was highly recommended to me by a friend of mine. Now, a lot of people seem to be split on this book. There's, like, one group of people who say this is one of the best Batman stories ever written, and then another group of people say that this is one of the worst. Now, I personally enjoyed Hush quite a bit, but I've seen some very negative reviews on this book, and some of the points that certain people made I can kind of agree with, but overall I enjoyed Hush despite whatever flaws it might have, you know, and the story for this book is very contrived, but I don't know, I still enjoyed this book for the most part. I really didn't have any real problems with the overall book. While I can understand why some people might, I personally enjoyed it though. Now, the plot of Hush is it's set over the course of several months, and it's about a series of events that happen, all of them involving many of Batman's different enemies, including the Joker, Killer Croc, Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, and Batman notices that a lot of his enemies are doing things which kind of go out of character for them, and he starts to believe that all these events that are happening are somehow being orchestrated by one person, and that person is this mysterious man wrapped in bandages. So throughout the story, Batman is trying to figure out who this man actually is and what this man wants with him. But it appears that whoever this person is, it appears that this person knows that Batman is actually Bruce Wayne. Now, in the beginning of this story, something happens to Batman where he gets his skull fractured, so what ends up happening is this sergeant named Thomas Elliot ends up saving his life, and it turns out that Thomas Elliot was a very good friend of Bruce Wayne when he was a child, and throughout the book there are a lot of flashbacks showing you what their relationship was like when Bruce Wayne and Thomas Elliot were children. Now, throughout the story, like I said, Batman is trying to figure out who this person actually is. Now, I will say, before I read this book, I actually already knew who the bad guy was going to end up being, and I will admit, when you're reading it, it is kind of telegraphed to the reader pretty early on who the bad guy is actually going to be, but there's a point in the story where it appears that it could be Two-Face, there's a point in the story where it appears that it could be the Riddler, and there's even a point where it appears that Ra's al Ghul could be behind all this. Now, as I said earlier on in this review, I personally really enjoyed Hush. I mean, yes, the story is very contrived, and when you find out who the villain is by the end of it, it really doesn't come as a big shock. I mean, then again, I already knew who the villain was going to end up being even before I read this, but when you're reading it, it is kind of, once again, it is pretty much telegraphed to the reader pretty early on who the villain is going to end up being. But I still enjoyed it. Like, I thought it was a very interesting story, and I really like how this book focuses a lot on Batman and Catwoman's relationship, and I really like how the book focused on their relationship, and also I really liked a lot of the flashbacks that happened in this book that go back to when Bruce Wayne and Thomas Elliot were children, and this is right before Bruce Wayne's parents were killed, and, you know, I really like how it talks about their relationship, and I thought, like, their relationship as children was very believable, you know, so there's a lot of stuff I really do like about this book, so while it might have its flaws, I still enjoy this book for the most part. Now, one scene in this book that I really thought was funny was there's a scene in this book that takes place in Metropolis, which is where most of the Superman storyline takes place in, and, you know, and there's a point in this story where Superman gets involved with the whole story, but what happens is there's a scene in this book where Catwoman punches Poison Ivy in the face because of something that Poison Ivy did to her, and Superman is there and he asks her, was that really necessary? And then Catwoman and Batman just look at each other and then they both say yes at the same time. I thought that was really funny. You know, so I really like, I actually think this book has a lot of really good character moments in it. There's also a point in this book where Batman actually comes very close to killing the Joker, but then Batman is stopped by Jim Gordon, which I thought was very interesting because if you know Jim Gordon and the Joker's history with each other, you know Jim Gordon has every reason to hate the Joker, yet he still stops Batman from killing the Joker because he knows if Batman kills the Joker, he will be no better than the Joker is. But once again, I enjoyed Hush quite a bit. It might have its flaws, but I still enjoyed it. Now, one thing I do want to say about this book is this is a very continuity-heavy book in the sense that it's very much set in the mainstream DC continuity. Now, I'm not much of a follower of the whole, like, mainstream continuity. I just read, like, random different story arcs in graphic novels, and I just read them as standalone stories. But in this book, you realize that Lex Luthor is now the President of the United States, and Talia al Ghul, who is Ra's al Ghul's daughter, is pretty much the head of LexCorp, which is the corporation that Lex Luthor used to run. And I guess those happened in other comic books leading up to this, but I've never read any of those comic books leading up to this, so, you know, so it is a very continuity-heavy story, and once again, I'm not a big follower of, like, the whole mainstream DC continuity. I just read random different story arcs. You know, but I still feel like you could read this as a standalone story, but it is definitely very much set in the mainstream continuity. And Jeph Loeb actually does a little introduction for this book where he actually says that it was very hard for him to write in the mainstream continuity because both The Long Halloween and Dark Victory, those could easily be read as standalone Batman stories, which even though those are considered to be canon, you could easily read them as Batman stories set in their own continuity because the way those stories play out, you know, they're set early in Bruce Wayne's career as Batman, so you could easily read those as standalone stories. This one definitely has a lot of continuity behind it, you know, and apparently it was very hard for Jeph Loeb to write within the mainstream DC continuity. But yeah, that's my review on Hush by Jeph Loeb, and bye.